Psychoanalysis, Literary Theory and Practice, presented by Hanan Mudaffar. This is part of a series of lectures on schools of literary theory and their application to literature. Both theory and application are taken from Rivkin and Ryan's Anthology to Literary Theory, with the article on Shakespeare's King Lear used for the application. The presentation is enhanced with scenes from the 1975 BBC production of the play. Reading King Lear and watching the BBC production before starting the lecture would be beneficial. Psychoanalytic literary theory began with Freud's idea that the unconscious forces shape human thought and behavior. Repressed desires, early conflicts, and forbidden instincts surface indirectly through dreams, symptoms, and symbols. Psychoanalysis focuses on emotional depth and hidden divisions rather than just language or structure. Literature becomes a site where disguised desires appear through displacement, fantasy, and repetition. Later theorists like Lear and Lacan expanded Freud's ideas, linking the unconscious to early bonds, identity, and language. This presentation applied psychoanalytic literary theory to King Lear, showing how Lear's fear of loss and need for fusion drives his tragic collapse. Freud revolutionized psychology by proposing that much of the mind operates unconsciously, as he introduced in his book, The Interpretation of Dreams. He challenged Enlightenment ideas, showing that behavior is driven by repressed desires and instincts. These forces surface indirectly through dreams, symptoms, and the slips of the tongue. Civilization depends on repressing these drives, creating internal psychic tension and conflict. Building on the idea of repression, Freud argued that civilization requires individuals to suppress their primal instincts. The repression is necessary for social living and results in inner division and psychic tension, producing symptoms like compulsive behaviors and feelings of uncanniness. This internal stranger, the repressed self, often manifests through repetition, compulsions, and uncanny experiences. Freud's insight into repression leads to his exploration of techniques that uncover the unconscious both clinically and culturally. Freud used free association to uncover unconscious material by letting patients speak without censorship. Dreams disguise forbidden wishes through symbolic dream work techniques. First, displacement, which is shifting emotional energy to safer objects, such as dreaming of a stranger instead of a parent. Second, condensation, which is merging multiple figures or ideas into one dream symbol. Third, inversion, which is reversing real emotions, such as dreaming affection where fear exists. These mechanisms protect the mind by masking unconscious desires. Freud notes that similar distortions appear not only in dreams, but also in everyday behaviors and neurotic symptoms. In everyday life, unconscious conflicts are handled through defense mechanisms that disguise forbidden dreams. Freud highlighted key defense mechanisms. Fixation, which is remaining emotionally tied to early development stages, such as smoking arising from oral fixations. Splitting, which is viewing people or experiences in extremes to avoid emotional conflicts. Projection, which is shifting unacceptable feelings onto others, so accusing others of jealousy when the person is feeling jealous. Interjection, which is taking in external voices or values, sometimes leading to harsh self-criticism. These defenses protect the ego but create inner tension and psychological symptoms. Freud divided the mind into three parts. The id, which is the unconscious drives, which seek immediate gratification, operating by the pleasure principle. The ego, or the rational mediator, balancing desires and reality through the reality principle. The superego, which is the internalized parental and societal norms, producing guilt when standards are violated. A healthy ego balances id and superego demands. Failure leads to neurosis, such as phobias or compulsions, or in extreme cases, to psychosis. Freud's model shows that identity and sexuality emerge from negotiating unconscious tensions. Freud proposed that sexual energy, libido, is present from infancy and evolves through various stages, oral, anal, and genital. Sometimes unresolved conflicts lead to fixation at a particular stage. The Oedipus complex is central here. A child desires the opposite sex parent and experiences rivalry within the same sex parent. Healthy adult identity formation requires renouncing these desires and identifying with the same sex parent. This internalization establishes the basis of social norms and individual morality. Freud's insights into sexuality and identification laid the foundation for later psychoanalytic theories. Post-Freudian thinkers emphasized relationships, especially with the mother, as primary in shaping the psyche. Object relation theorists, Melanie Klein, Donald Whitcomb, R.W. Fairbairn, and Margaret Muller, stress how early childhood or relationships, not just instincts, shape emotional development. Healthy or unhealthy psychological growth hinges on these early attachments. Concepts like separation individuation describe how the developing self negotiates dependence and autonomy. New Freudianism, especially Lacan, shifted the focus onto language and unconscious drives, redefining the ego not as coherent, but as constructed fantasy shaped by language and culture. This turn toward language and unconscious desire leads directly into Jacques Lacan's innovative psychoanalytic theory. Lacan emphasized that identity is formed not through inner unity, but through external images and language. In the mirror stage, the infant misrecognizes its reflection as a coherent self, creating an ego built on illusion. Entry into the symbolic order, the order of language and culture, permanently separates the individual from primal unity with the mother. This separation creates a lack, a permanent sense of absence and incompetence at the heart of subjectivity. Desire is structured around this lack and is endlessly deferred across change of substitute objects. Lacan's theory connects psychoanalysis with culture, literature, and the endless play of meaning. Literature operates similarly to dreams. It displaces, disguises, and symbolically represents unconscious conflicts. It becomes a space where repressed desires are explored through symbols, metaphors, and displacements. Freud's concept of the uncanny shows how literature evokes repressed fears through indirect expression. Psychoanalytic criticism seeks to uncover these hidden structures beneath narrative surfaces. Reading literature psychoanalytically reveals how texts, like psyches, are layered, fractured, and haunted by what they cannot openly express. To see psychoanalysis in action, we now turn to King Lear, where unconscious conflicts around love, loss, and identity erupt through Lear's tragic downfall. Geoffrey Stern's psychoanalytic reading of King Lear shows that Lear's division of his kingdom is less a political act than a desperate attempt to prevent personal loss and preserve his fragile self. Lear tries to replace genuine love with words as deeds, demanding public declaration rather than private loyalty. Cordelia's refusal to flatter him exposes Lear's deep dependence on mirroring for his sense of identity. Lear's need for Cordelia stems from an earlier unhealed loss of maternal care, making her both daughter and substitute mother. Denied the care he craves, Lear's rage and madness reflect a collapse into infantile vulnerability. His final fantasy of union with Cordelia breaks the necessary boundary between father and daughter, leading inevitably to tragedy. In Stern's view, Lear's downfall comes from his refusal to accept loss, change, and separation, the conditions of human love and survival. The transfer of the kingdom in Lear masks a deeper psychological crisis. Lear's apparent political strategy to prevent future conflict actually conceals a personal need to maintain emotional control over Cordelia, his youngest daughter. She represents more than love. She is Lear's emotional anchor and surrogate for his deceased wife. The love trial he stages is like a marriage ritual, aimed at keeping Cordelia close and preventing her departure to France. Let's watch this critical moment where Lear invites Cordelia to express her love. Notice how his demand is less about political strategy and more about needing an emotional pledge. And notice also how Cordelia's honest, measured response, far from satisfying him, strikes at the heart of his psychic insecurity.
What can you say? To draw a third more opulent than your sisters? Speak.
Nothing, my lord.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing will come of nothing. Speak again.
Unhappy that I am, I cannot heave my heart into my mouth. I love your majesty according to my bond, no more nor less.
Cordelia, mend your speech a little, lest you may mar your fortunes.
Good my lord, you have begot me, bred me, loved me. I return those duties back as a right fit. Obey you, love you, and most honor you.
As you can see, Cordelia refuses to flatter Lear. Her honesty denies him the emotional certainty he craves, setting off the spiral of rage and collapse we'll examine next. Lear's ultimate desire is to freeze time, to remain the center of Cordelia's world, even as she marries, ruling without ruling. But Cordelia's refusal to play along exposes Lear's vulnerability and spirals him into narcissistic collapse. After Cordelia's refusal shatters Lear's fragile sense of self, he spirals into madness. At the height of this collapse, Lear clings to a final fantasy, imagining a timeless union with Cordelia, safe from the world's demand. But this dream too can only end in tragedy. Cordelia remains his self-object, the one who sustains his fragile sense of self. Her forgiveness temporarily restores his coherence. In prison, he imagines a timeless fantasy, just the two of them, like birds in the cage, beyond society's reach. Let's watch a moment where Lear dreams of eternal fusion with Cordelia. Notice how the fantasy of life in prison, completely enclosed together, reveals a deep desire to escape the symbolic world of law, separation, and society.
No, no, no. Come, let's away to prison. We two alone will sing like birds in a cage. When thou dost ask me blessing, I'll kneel down and ask of thee forgiveness. And so we'll live and pray and sing and tell old tales and laugh at gilded butterflies and hear poor rogues talk of court news. And we'll talk with them too, who loses and who wins, who's in, who's out. And take upon us the mystery of things, as if we were God's spies. And we'll wear out in a walled prison packs and sects of the Great One.
In psychoanalytic terms, this dream violates the symbolic order. It attempts to erase separation, time, and law. As Freud suggests, such attempts must ultimately lead not to fulfillment, but to destruction and death. This incestuous dream violates the symbolic order. According to Freud's law of culture, such desires must end in death. Lear dies with Cordelia in his arms, unable to distinguish between her breath and silence. His words collapse into final action, death on her body. In this tragic arc, psychoanalysis reveals how loss, desire, and identity intertwine, and how literature mirrors the unconscious. In conclusion, Freud revealed that much of human life is shaped by unconscious forces hidden beneath conscious awareness. Desire and oppression, he argued, not only govern individual behavior, but also shape the structures of culture itself. Dreams, art, and neurotic symptoms serve as indirect expressions of deep loss, exposing the emotional fractures repression seeks to conceal. Building on Freud's ideas, Lacan introduced the notion that language structures identity and that a fundamental sense of lack drives human desire. In Shakespeare's King Lear, we see the tragic cost of this endless desire, as Lear's refusal to accept loss leads to his emotional and literal downfall. Literature, like the psyche, mirrors a fractured self, layered, displaced, and haunted by what it cannot openly say. Thank you for your attention.